Even when you feel low, you can still go. Even when you feel slow, you can still go. Even when there's no hope, you can still go. I never answer to no, man, I still go. Go, 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 yo, go. Hustle hard, hustle every single day. I'll be making moves till I'm buried in my grave. Through the system, I don't wanna be a slave. I've been doing shit my way, or the highway. And in the driveway is a nice range. Cause I grind through the climb, I invite pain. You'll never hear me, bitch, nah, I don't complain. Just gotta flip the switch and you can go and obtain anything you want, anything you need. Your mind's got the key ingredient, it's belief. They deceive with the negativity, but I just slide right by that energy. Even when you feel low, you can still go. Even when you feel slow, you can still go. Even when there's no hope, you can still go. I never answer to no, man, I still go.
Welcome, friends. In this episode, we are installing a new 10-inch subwoofer in the Raptor to fix an issue that I, of course, created myself. But I'll talk about that at the end if anyone cares. The first thing I did was install the subwoofer into the box. And to ensure that the subwoofer would actually fit behind the seats in the rear, I ordered a Refurbished JL Audio 10TW3, which is shallow mount, and a custom F150 sealed sub box from Soundskins. I pulled out the sub and removed the plastic wrap from the sub box. This thing shipped exactly like you see here, but with some cardboard taped on the corners, so I was very surprised to see that there wasn't any damage. I was also surprised that the box did not have a, quote, upgraded SMD terminal cup installed, and that the cup itself was, has massive terminals which stick out like an inch from the face of an intentionally shallow box. I used the sub as its own template and drilled straight through the holes, not because I enjoy destroying expensive things, but because I needed to install oversized 1/4" 20 socket cap bolts. After drilling the 1/4" pilot holes, I drilled larger 3/8" inch holes for the wood threaded inserts. Once all of the holes were drilled, I installed the inserts using a 6mm Allen key, and then I cleaned up the lifted surface coating around the inserts using an X-Acto knife and vacuumed everything up to make sure it was clean. I verified hole alignment and fitment of the stainless steel hardware before wiring the sub using 12-gauge speaker wire from a local shop, since the wiring kit that I purchased did not have speaker wire in it. The shop employees made sure to let me know that I was an idiot for thinking that the box would come pre-wired. The audio control amp has a 2 ohm output and the speaker is 4 ohm, so I connected the appropriate wires into the sub terminals, and then I cut the wiring to the cup at an appropriate length, which would still enable me to service the sub if necessary. I stripped the wires, crimped the appropriate sized terminals, and sealed it up with heat shrink. Then I could do the final installation of the sub using stainless steel hardware, connect the wire terminals to the backside of the SMD cup, which did require me to unscrew the bolts from that 3D printed cup, and then I sat the cup in place to drill some 1/8" pilot holes for the included screws. The new sub will sit on the passenger side, so I needed to remove the stock jack from the rear. I didn't want to do this at first, but I don't have a spare tire mounted under the truck, and I keep a 2-ton hydraulic jack in the bed, so there was no reason to keep the jack, just the special funnel. After the jack was out, I removed the bolt and nut that hold on the subwoofer box using a 13mm deep socket and extension. Once I unplugged the wiring connector and used a pry tool to unclip the wire fastener from the stock sub box, I was able to just pull that whole thing up and out. Next, I removed the jack retaining bracket from the floor using a T40 Torx bit and extension. What I missed the first time was the stud bolt in the floor that I needed to pull out using a 10mm deep socket and extension to allow the new box to fit flat. Once the new box was flat, I used a silver Sharpie to mark where to cut the rear carpeting, and then I cut it out using a box cutter. The carpet and padding is pretty thick in some parts, so a larger blade may have been useful. Also, there are a lot of wires in the back of the cab, so caution is needed to avoid cutting any of those wires when removing the carpet. I quickly realized that the box would not fit with this module wiring in the way, so I ended up having to remove the stock amp and bracket using a small Torx bit and 10mm deep socket. And then I used a pry tool to pull out the rivets that hold on the rear carpet to the back of the cab and unbolt the module using a 10mm socket. With the module off, I removed the small plastic brackets on the module using a small Torx bit. I actually ended up using those 4 screws to mount the amp to the board. On the back of the cab, I leveled out the 2 layers of sound deadening, cleaned the surfaces with acetone, and added some 3M tape to the back of the module so that I could stick the module up a little bit higher. I did have to cut out an additional section of carpeting to clear the module. I reinstalled the rear carpet using the same push rivets that I had pulled out initially, and that way I could start actually fitting up the box. Only I couldn't get the seat back on the passenger seat to latch since there was a frame bar that was hitting the subwoofer surface. I cut out the excess vinyl flooring, removed the foam from the cab vent on the passenger side, and even cut and removed the sound deadening from the lower surface to get the box as tight as possible to the rear of the cab. It did help a little bit, but ultimately the sub stuck out too far and the seat frame was hitting the surface, so I had to take some drastic measures to make it fit. Now that it was time for wiring, I started opening up all of the parts to make this sub work. I bought a custom plug-and-play wiring harness, kicker wiring kit, along with the audio control amp and bass knob from Joe at Plug and Play Kits. Separately, I purchased a 1087 design mounting board from Soundskins Stereo. I bought the larger one, so I needed to cut it for the available space. I marked the cut point, drew the straight line, and cut off the excess using a jigsaw. Then I added the included mounting brackets before figuring out where to mount everything. I still needed the stock amp to drive the front speakers, so I mounted that low toward the driver's side to ensure that the wiring would reach. Then I centered the audio control amp in the remaining space and screwed it in. Next, I tested fitment of the board and I ran the speaker wire from the box terminals over to the amp. I gave myself a little bit of extra space, but I wish I had given myself more because I ended up needing a little more wire. I attempted to figure out a good spacing to drill the holes for the wires, but I didn't do a good job accounting for the wire bending space since the board is so thick. I ended up using the upper screw holes for the lower portion of the amp to move it up higher and give the wiring a little bit more room. Then I added a ferrule to the ground and prepped the power wire for installation, exceeding the recommended lead length based on where I wanted to mount the fuse. I stripped the fuse sides, added the ferrules, and heat shrink before going to mount the fuse block. My dual battery wiring, fuse, and solenoid take up a lot of space, so I decided to mount the block on the side of the engine bay using self-tapping sheet metal screws. Next, I installed the fuse and ran the power wire down the firewall, installed the wire into the fuse block, and made sure to zip tie it with my other wiring bundle in order to avoid tension directly on the fuse block. Then I installed the fuse to battery cable, but I didn't actually connect it to the battery yet. I also needed to reposition the washer hose to ensure that water wasn't dripping directly onto the fuse block. Instead of running the power wire through the firewall, I ran it along the frame and up through the grommet in the passenger front floor well. Then I ran it in the tray along the main wiring harness, under and behind the C-pillar trim, and behind the sub. It was time for final installation, so I installed the amp board using the existing holes with the new supplied bolts, and used the rear bracket bolt as the main ground. but I don't recommend this since it's difficult to ensure that it doesn't interfere with the seat latch. I also connected all of the wires, plugged in the custom harness, and put some covers on the sub box terminal bolts. The amp does need to be set up with a remote bass knob attached if you have that remote bass knob to identify the max power, set the AccuBass threshold, and set the output, but that's covered by audio control in a tutorial video. Here is the before and after with fade full to the rear and volume at 14.
I never answer to no, man, I still go, 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 go. I never answer to no, man, I still go, 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 yeah, go. Hustle hard, hustle every single day. I'll be making moves till I'm buried in my grave.
Alright, so like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, this is all my fault, and that's because I installed an aftermarket rear bumper, which led to a custom cab side exhaust, which then led to more sound deadening because it was way too loud. I have 2 layers on the rear and floor of the cab, as well as a layer on the door shell and a layer inside the door card. I used to like the stock sub before, but while the sound deadening made the door speakers sound better, the sub seemed to rely on the resonance from the back of the cab in order to actually sound good. And I couldn't hear the sub from the driver's seat anymore at all. My original plan was to install 1 or 2 Kicker Hideaway subs on the 1087 design amp board, like I read about in a forum, but decided to just put that money toward a nicer setup. The whole thing was way more work than I expected, and this was entirely because of the sub box. The box is just garbage. It didn't fit at all due to the sub stick out, and it still wouldn't allow the seat to lift up even after I cut out the bar, because the seat wiring was hitting the box. I had to unclip and reroute the seat wiring to get it to work. The MTI Acoustics box was twice as expensive as the Soundskins box at the time, so I bought the cheaper option. But now MTI has dropped their price by like 40%, and it's definitely worth it to buy the trusted one that's guaranteed to fit. Plus, MTI has amp boards that fit perfectly with their enclosures. The custom harness really isn't necessary since there are videos out there showing how to wire up a line output converter to the Ford harness, so MTI could actually be a one-stop shop. I did personally buy the JL sub itself refurbished from Sonic Electronics instead of new from one of the other distributors, just because of the cost. You save an extra $100. Regardless of how the actual setup went, I feel like it's still better than buying an actual loaded kit at like $2,000 and up. They're so expensive. But I'm very happy with the sub now. I love the sound, and it's great, even though I basically keep it at like 10 or 20% of the available power. So that's it. Sorry for the long gaps between videos. I've been out of town a few times and busy with work, so I'll get to it when I can. Thank you for watching.